Now, today's presentation will be led by Amy Smith from right here out of Region 10, and we're excited for her to walk us through today's session topic, Navigating the Full and Individual Evaluation, Your Roadmap to the FIE. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amy.
Thank you. Hello. I'm so excited to be here today. My name, as she said, Amy Smith. I am an evaluation consultant here at Region 10, and I've been an educator for over 30 years. I've served as a special ed teacher, as practiced as a diagnostician, and a special ed administrator before coming to Region 10. So let's get started. All right. Can you relate to a 2-hour delay leaving someplace because you decided not to listen when your GPS decided to reroute you? Our GPS can be a wonderful tool when we use it to identify the route we need, because the key is getting to that final destination. And in our case, that is known as a free and appropriate public education for your child. And so today we're going to focus on understanding the FIE, the full individual evaluation. This tool can help, and this navigation tool, the FIE, can be used and should be used initially and throughout the ARD process to guide decisions that will help you to work through all the detours, roadblocks, and assure your child receives a free and appropriate public education, one that allows them to move forward towards the plans and hopes for their future beyond high school. But how do we use the FIE to achieve a FAPE? The federal law tells us that students who receive special ed services are entitled to a free and appropriate public education, or a FAPE. The way we get there is through the IEP process. As you can see on this graphic, it starts with an evaluation. By following this process and using our evaluation data, we are able to navigate and help our students receive that educational benefit that is part of their FAPE. In today's session, we will discuss the purpose and parts of the full and individual evaluation, how to use it to discover your child's route to that final destination. And we will look at tips for understanding and navigating the evaluation in order to land on that final destination of success in school for your child. Using the FIE, the ARD committee will determine if the child is eligible for special education services due to any identified areas of disability, impact of that disability on their present levels of achievement and functioning, as well as the type and extent of special ed and related services that might be needed. The FIE has two important essential elements. First, it is comprehensive and it is designed to address the whole child. Secondly, it will identify any areas where your child meets criteria for one or more of the 13 disability categories under federal law. Here are the 13 disability categories identified in Texas. As mentioned earlier in this section, a primary purpose of the FIE is to identify the condition for the student who meets criteria. In Texas, there are 13 categories under which children ages 3 through 21 may be eligible for special education and related services. Children with a visual impairment, deaf blindness, or who are deaf, hard of hearing, are eligible to receive services from birth. The Admission, Review, and Dismissal, or ARD committee, makes the eligibility determination, but the FIE identifies if the student meets the criteria or how they meet the criteria for these different disability conditions. It's up to the ARD committee to determine if they are eligible and require special education services. When conducting an evaluation for your child, the process will include information about your child's academic, developmental, and functional performance. It will assure assessments that are administered by trained and knowledgeable personnel. They will select assessments that do not discriminate against your child. And finally, all conclusions will be based on multiple sources of data. Keep in mind that the term assess or evaluate does not always equal a test. There are multiple methods and processes used to assess a child as part of a full and individual evaluation. The evaluation process starts with how data is gathered. Your child's evaluation team will use observations, review records, conduct direct assessment, and may include rating scales that may be completed by yourself or their teachers. These methods of assessment will include input from you, teachers and parents, service providers, evaluation team members, and sometimes the child themselves. Sometimes parents are working with private therapists and tutors or have even had an evaluation completed by another professional. In those cases, with your consent, their information will be gathered and considered as well. All of this will be done in order to identify all the disabilities your child may meet criteria, assure that assessment practices are fair based on your child's individual unique needs and background. The assessment data gathered will be used to understand your child's present levels of functioning, impacting their ability to access and make progress in school. And finally, we'll provide recommendations for services and supports that may be needed to assure that access and progress in the curriculum can happen. All FIEs address a child's strengths or intact abilities and deficits in functional skills, developmental skills, and academic skills. Remember, the goal of special education is for a student with a disability to have access and make progress in the general ed curriculum. Deficits in one or more of these three areas can create barriers to this access and progress. Every FIE report will be organized with multiple sections. The subheadings may vary in name and order, but these are the areas that are covered in order to capture those strengths and weaknesses in regard to functional skills, developmental skills, and academic skills. In a minute, we'll take a look at the common types of data found in each of the sections of the report. Some students will require evaluation in these additional areas that may be also included in your FIE, or may be added as an attached report that is referenced in the main body of the FIE report. Related services include evaluations for services that may be required for the IEP to provide a FAPE. Some common services include occupational therapy, physical therapy, assistive technology, orientation and mobility services, and transportation. Transition assessments are typically conducted annually in conjunction with the development of a transition plan, which is required as part of the IEP beginning at age 14. However, there may be times where a functional vocation evaluation is needed in order to determine specific supports and services needed for that student to benefit from their IEP. Another area of assessment that may be included as a part of an FIE is a functional behavior assessment, or an FBA. When a student demonstrates behaviors that are interfering with learning and is not responsive to positive behavioral reinforcement, they may require a behavior intervention plan. This is the first step, conducting the FBA, so that we know what needs to go into that plan. When you first open the FIE report for your child, you will likely see a section entitled something like Reason for Referral. Often this is where the evaluation team will provide a summary of the concerns that led to that referral, who made the referral, and any areas of disability that were considered as a part of the FIE report you are reading. It may also state the purposes of the FIE required by federal law that we discussed at the beginning of the presentation. And some FIEs have sections that follow where some of this information may also be found. But let's dive into the other areas and sections of the report. Sociological. This section will capture information such as an educational history, family history, events that may be impacting the student, including how the child functions in their community and in the home setting. This information contributes to understanding impact of disabilities across settings, as well as helping to determine if the reason a child is not making progress is due to something other than a disability. You will notice that the green box on the screen shows the data that is often gathered from these people and resources. You see parent, review of records, and previous evaluations. Next is the health physical section of the report. This includes information regarding your child's health and developmental history, a summary of previous medical evaluations, such as a report from the doctor regarding ADHD, and information regarding sensory and motor skills. For most students, this will include results of a school-based hearing and vision screening. If a child is suspected of visual impairment or deaf hard of hearing or deaf-blind eligibility, then the specific assessments required for those eligibilities will be found here as well, or referenced with an additional report attached. Every evaluation will include a section that addresses communication and language. For children who come from homes where multiple languages are used, there will be data supporting language preference and dominance. If your child has difficulties with communication, articulation, or fluency of speech, a speech and language pathologist will report their findings in this section. Again, this information may contribute to determining an eligibility, such as a speech impairment or autism, but it also can assist in understanding the impacts on learning, as well as when challenges in learning are primarily due to acquiring English as opposed to being a language disorder. In the emotional behavioral section of the report, information regarding your child's emotional regulation and social skills observed by you as well as teachers and the evaluators. This is where the information gathered as a part of the functional behavior assessment would be included. Often, the child's perspective regarding their emotional and social needs is reflected in this portion of the report as well. You will see, and again, in the green box, the people who often contribute to this section of the report. You will find a section as well that may be titled Cognitive and Adaptive Behavior. The information on cognitive abilities or intellectual functioning may include formal measures of cognitive skills or information about processing based on developmental checklists, observations made during the evaluation, based on your child's engagement with various tasks. When a formal measure of cognitive ability or intellectual ability is administered, you will often see scores in a chart. In a bit, we'll talk a little bit more about what those scores mean. A formal cognitive measure may not always be required, and depending on your child's unique needs and abilities, a formal measure of cognitive ability or IQ may not be appropriate and therefore not administered. Again, data that is reported is based on what is needed to answer the questions that the FIE is designed to help us answer: eligibility conditions, impact on functioning and learning, and need for special education services. Following the cognitive data, the FIE will address your child's adaptive behavior needs. This is data that assists us in understanding how readily your child is able to adapt to their environment. It may include functional communication skills, caring for basic health needs, or accessing their community with appropriate levels of independence. Often this data is gathered using informal parent and teacher information surveys and observations of that student in various settings. If a formal measure of adaptive behavior is included, you will likely be asked to rate your child's skills in various areas of adaptive behavior, either by completing a survey sent to you or through an interview. If you require assistance to access or understand any surveys or other documents shared with you by the evaluation team, please let them know. We want to make sure that you are able to meaningfully participate in this process and recognize that sometimes the forms we ask you to complete can be confusing to someone who is not familiar with them or the language of the questionnaires that is used. In this section, Achievement, you will find data that identifies strengths and weaknesses in learning based on data from multiple sources. This data is critical in assisting the ARD committee when determining the impact of the disability on learning and identifying baseline data and areas that are deficit that we need to know about in order to address their needs through specially designed instruction. Not all students who qualify for special education will demonstrate deficits in achievement, but if the data captured in this section of the report is there, it does assist us in understanding where it is impacting learning and to what extent. Next, we have the assistive technology section of the report. In this section, various technologies that are determined to be required for your child to access and benefit from their IEP will be discussed. This may include communication devices, supporting oral and or written communication, or something like an FM system to assist with hearing. You may find assistive technology recommended in other places in the FIE report as well, related to other services that your child requires, such as physical therapy or learning in media to support an impairment in vision. And again, in the green box, you will see the people that primarily contribute to this section. Towards the end of the report, you will find a summary that address eligibility and needs for special ed services and supports. This will include an explanation of how your child does or does not meet eligibility criteria for any of the disabilities that were addressed in this FIE, impact on access and progress in the curriculum due to those disabilities based on how they manifest for your child, impacts on various based on each child's unique needs, strengths that your child demonstrated in their functioning, in their development, and in their academic skills. And finally, you will find a targeted list of recommendations for the ART committee to review and consider as the IEP is developed. All right, now that we've discussed the sections of the report, we need to talk about types of data that you may find and what it means. So the FIE is going to contain data from multiple sources. First, your child's FIE will include informal data. This is data derived from reviews of records, work samples, parent-teacher information, as well as observational data. It is often reported through verbal descriptions. You also may find information from curriculum sources such as teacher-made tests, quiz results, district benchmarks, or progress monitoring data. This data is reported based on % of accuracy or fluency with specific skills and sometimes includes a skills analysis. Then you will find data from criterion sources. This data is based on demonstrating a preset criteria that a student is expected to demonstrate at a certain age or grade. These are often reported in terms of percentile ranks or other scaled scores based on a framework allowing results to be compared, comparing students' performance across the district or nationally to those criteria. Finally, our evaluation reports often include data from standardized norm-referenced measures that are administered by one of the members of the evaluation team as a part of the assessment process. Some common tests you might find in your child's report include intelligence tests, speech and language assessments, achievement testing, behavior rating scales, or adaptive scales. Let's look at how norm reference tests are designed and the type of data that is reported from them. But before we do this, please remember, scores are only one piece of the puzzle used to identify a student's strengths and needs, and in some cases, not the most useful information. All the types of data used to write the FIE are important and needed to assist the ART committee in understanding the unique needs and strengths your child brings to the classroom. Okay, so the normative curve shown here on this slide is a visual representation of anticipated performance on what we call norm referenced assessments. Standard scores are used in a norm referenced assessment to compare one student's performance on a test to the performance of other students their same age and tell us where they fall in relation to that expected pattern of performance in the normal population. Notice the further out on the curve, the fewer students fall in those ranges. So, an example here. Most drivers, people that drive, right, we drive cars, most of us have few wrecks. So most drivers would fall in the average range. If we were to put those out there, we would say most drivers are going to be in that middle section, right, regarding the number of wrecks that are typically seen. If a driver has a significant number of wrecks, then there's fewer people that have that happen, right? So they're further from that middle group. So a standardized test is given the same way to all children. So that's one thing to keep in mind. When it's administered, we follow very specific directions, and it's given in the exact same format. every time. And that makes the results valid and reliable and allows to make these comparisons. Standard scores estimate whether a student's scores are above average, average, or below average compared to where the peers fell on these tests within that norm group. Their score reflects how far their performance on that measure was from the average score of the norm group. On most tests given to your child, a standard score of 100 represents the mean or the average score for that test. Standard scores enable comparison of a student's scores on different types of tests since they are based on the same scale. You will often also see percentile ranks used, and they are reported as well and are described performance relative to the standing of that child to that compared to that comparison group on a scale of 1 to 99. They indicate the percentage of the comparison group who had scores the same or as or lower. For example, if a student's score was in the 80th percentile, that means that only 20% of the students in that group scored better than they did, or that they scored better than 80% of the group. So that's what that score is telling you. So these descriptors for these ranges will vary based on the test that is used, but a universal way to describe the ranges of standard scores would be normative weakness within normal limits or average, or a normative strength. So on most tests that will be used with your child, the mean score, like we said, will be 100. And scores between 85 and 115 are considered to be within normal or expected range. In addition to a standard score between these on these results, you also see scaled scores listed in the report. With scaled scores, a 10 is your average or your mean score, and scores between 7 and 13 would be within normal limits. Finally, you may note that the charts and the scores show a range. If you see a range of scores, and it's called a confidence interval, that is because a standard score obtained on a test that we give your child should always be considered within a range and interpreted in light of all the other data. So in other words, your child's true score falls within a range. If your child obtained a 90, the confidence interval might be 86 to 94, meaning that we are confident that their true score falls between 86 and 94. So that is a statistical measure that is designed by the test makers and test publishers that can be reported. So keep in mind, it's about taking and understanding how all this data relates to all those other sources of data. It's not just these scores by themselves that we're going to use to make decisions. So it is also important to know what these scores are telling us and not telling us, right? So they're telling us how close is the score obtained to the average score compared to that sample group? How close was your child to that average score on that task or skill that was measured? And the probability a student will have success or difficulty with similar tasks. What they don't necessarily tell us is the skill level in relation to grade level standards, comparison to classmates on that skill, their actual classmates at school, and baseline data needed for determining current levels. So that's why we need those other data sources, understanding how they're performing in the classroom on curriculum measures, state assessments, benchmarks, things like that. That's what's going to help fill in those missing pieces. So the FIE puts all the pieces together from multiple sources of data, broken down by sections with descriptive data that we try to make understandable to you as the reader. However, in the sections that contain results from these norm reference measures, such as standard scores, it may not be as easy to understand. Let's talk about what these scores might represent and how they can assist you and the team in knowing more about your child. So when we consider norm reference tests that are given for achievement, these components listed on this slide are often the measures or the terms you'll see outlining how we assess reading, math, written expression, and oral language. So here is an example of some scores. So if these were the scores obtained, right, keeping in mind that 85 to 115 are considered within the normal limits or average range, this student demonstrated scores on the subtest measuring basic reading fluency skills in that average range, right, with a 94 and a 95. When considering what the examiner observed when completing these reading tasks, as well as what teachers are reporting and performance on other measures in the curriculum, The FIE would include statements indicating an overall picture of their strengths and challenges related to those reading skills. Additionally, it appears that this student obtained lower scores overall on subtests measuring their math skills, several of them being in that what we would consider below average range. So we would again look at that other data we gather about math to better understand what we're seeing here. Finally, in oral language, the student performed significantly better on a measure of listening comprehension than they did on a measure of oral expression. So we would look at other data from the classroom to see if those things held true, and then we can make some decisions and conclusions about what your child needs based on those patterns that we find. Another section of the evaluation that may contain technical language and norm reference scores is that cognitive section. So you may find that your child was given an IQ test as a part of their evaluation. Within that test is often a number reported that is known as either a full scale or an overall score, which represents what is called general intelligence. And this is a measure meant to estimate the mental capacity that influences performance on various cognitive abilities and skills needed for success in school. Keep in mind, however, that an intelligence test, while providing insight about strengths and weaknesses and processing, is just one way to understand your child's abilities and that influence learning and development. Within the cognitive information, you may find some terms that are on this slide, or even their associated abbreviations that are listed there. For example, most cognitive assessments include subtests that provide a measure of a person's short-term memory abilities. This is the ability to see or listen to information, such as a phone number, and hold it in long enough so that I can write it down. The abilities listed on this slide are the ones most associated with learning and most commonly measured on cognitive batteries that you may see in your child's evaluation. This slide provides you with some connections found in research in regards to learning and cognitive development. For example, depending on how a weakness in a person's short-term memory is affecting them, you might see difficulties in one or more of the academic skills listed below. Basic reading, reading comp, reading fluency, written expression, math calc, and problem solving, oral expression, or listening comp. It could be in any one or more of these areas. It doesn't necessarily mean all of them will be challenging for your child. It just depends on how that short-term memory weakness is impacting them. Or if you have a student or your child is having difficulty with math problem solving, then you may find deficits or challenges in those processes regarding things like fluid reasoning, or short-term memory or long-term memory. Those can influence challenges in math problem solving. Therefore, it's critical that we're using other sources of data to measure performance on grade level skills to be included and analyzed to cover comprehensively and understand the challenges that your child is having. In the FIE, you may find information about executive functioning. These are skills required for the brain to make connections efficiently so learning can take place. A person with ADHD often has difficulties with executive functioning, especially their ability to sustain attention to a task for an expected amount of time, or difficulty in inhibiting or stopping responses to something else going on around them. You'll find a helpful resource linked here for you when we are going to be sharing this slide deck with you in a PDF. And this resource is something that you might find helpful in understanding those challenges in executive functioning if they're reported for your student or your child in their FIE. So to wrap us up, here are some things we can look for in your child's FIE, right? We're going to look for concerns that drove the referral, areas of disability that are suspected, strengths and weaknesses that are identified, and how your child's learning is impacted and what recommendations are being made to help support those challenges. The information you provide is a critical part of this process. Sharing information about family history or strengths you observe about your child or how they interact at home and community, or what support looks like at home, for example, when you're helping them to complete homework. All of this helps to assure that FIE paints a full picture of your child. So how can you help with this process? Some ways you can make help make this happen would be to find a mutually agreeable time to meet with the evaluation team. If they need to schedule an interview, schedule time to talk with you about what they're learning and get information from you. When you meet with the team members or anytime during that process of the evaluation, please ask clarifying questions that you may have. If anything is shared with you that is confusing or unclear, please let your evaluation team know. You will want to complete any parent information forms and return them to school as promptly as possible. Again, so they have the full set of data and will know which direction they need to go as they conduct the evaluation. You have the right, again, to have your child evaluated free of charge by the school. However, if you choose to have an outside evaluator conduct an evaluation, I encourage you to share those results with the school. The school will review and consider those results and recommendations and how they may impact current services being provided. Or if your child is going through an initial evaluation, this will assist your evaluation team in letting them know what additional information might still be needed to understand your child. So sharing that is very helpful. And keep in mind, once the evaluation is completed, if you disagree with the results, you have the right to ask for an independent educational evaluation to be completed in the areas where you are in disagreement. That would be paid for by the district or charter that you attend. Should you have questions or concerns, please reach out to one of these two agencies listed here on this slide. They are both resources available to you in the state of Texas to help you in navigating the process for your child or understanding things that they've shared maybe that are not making sense to you. They can certainly help guide you in the right direction. And I finally have linked some additional resources you may find helpful as you continue to navigate the evaluation process and the IEP process for your child. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you have a great end to the school year. And if you have any questions about the resources or information provided, just reach out to me. Thank you.